This is the Mavic 3 Classic. Now, this is a pared down version of the Mavic 3 that DJI put out last year, and it's got a lot of the same features as that drone. It's got the same large micro four thirds sensor, it's got the same excellent battery life, and a lot of the same flight characteristics and sensors and features and things like that. What it doesn't have is the telephoto lens and separate camera that you got with that drone, and nor does it have the option to record in ProRes, and you don't have the 1 GB of internal storage. Now, I reviewed that drone last year and I really did love the image quality that you got from that large sensor, and I love the battery life as well. But what I was struck by was the big difference in image quality that you got between the main camera with the larger sensor and the telephoto lens with the smaller sensor, to the point that I felt that there was a big difference in the usability of the telephoto lens, and I ended up not really using it that much. So basically, this has everything great about the Mavic 3, and I've been using it for the past couple of months on trips to Norway and Greenland and Iceland and putting it through its paces there. Now, it's important to note about this review that I'm a landscape photographer, and my use case for drones, they're not my prime photography tool. Like, most of my work is done with the camera, and I tend to use drones to give me just different perspectives on locations, to give me an aerial perspective, to give me more elevation. And I shoot sort of short clips for reels or for videos like this, but they're not my primary tool, and as such, that does affect the way that I look at them. So I'm interested in this as a platform to give me really stable cinematic footage and really good still images. I'm interested in the way that the drone flies and the way that it handles and its capabilities in wind, but things like tracking and its ability to follow me, things like that, are not features that they're not really relevant to my use case, so I won't really be talking about them that much in this review. Now, DJI have really refined the build and the design of their consumer drones over the last 5 or 6 years, and consequently this just feels like the full evolution of the Mavic line. It's really well made. Everything here just feels incredibly well engineered. It moves really easily, the way that the arms fold in and out. The quality of the gimbal is incredible. It just feels super solid and very, very stable. It's the same weight as the Mavic 2 Pro and the Mavic 3 before it, so it does have a fair bit of heft to it. It's quite a bit heavier than something like the Air 2S. So if you're like me, if you're carrying this alongside regular camera bodies and tripods, things like that, if you're going hiking with it, this, along with 3 batteries, is going to weigh a fair bit. In comparison with something like the Air 2S with 3 batteries, it weighs about 600 grams more, which is quite a bit. You know, that's an extra bit of weight to be carrying. But for what it gives you, this really isn't that heavy a drone, considering the size of the sensor that it's got and the fact that they really haven't increased the weight over the Mavic 2 Pro. Then the weight really isn't anything to complain about. Now, in the time that I've been using this, it's taken a few knocks, it's taken a few bangs, some rough landings, it's been blown around a bit, it's been bashed around in my bag for about 3 months, and it still looks as good as new. It really is quite tough, and this really doesn't feel frail or flimsy in any way. It just feels very solid and very well made. Now, like the Mavic 3 Cine, this uses the whole of the sensor to shoot 5.1K, and you can shoot 5.1K up to 50 frames per second, not 60. Now, 50 frames per second will still give you enough to slow down that to half the speed on a 24 or 25 FPS timeline. But if you want to shoot in 60 FPS, then you're going to have to go down to 4K. And you can also shoot 120 frames per second in 4K. That gives you the capacity to slow down to a quarter of the speed in a 30 FPS timeline. Now, the footage right out of the camera is really good, the same as you'll get from the Mavic 3 Cine. There's just a wonderful tonality about it, the way that it captures from the shadows to the highlights, the dynamic range, and it has really lovely natural color. Now, I shot in a range of conditions and was very happy every single time with the footage that I got out of this camera, whatever ISO that I was using. It just looks really great. Now, of course, it records in D-Log, which is a really flat profile containing a large amount of data, which is really good for color grading, and I found that the color grading of these files was really nice, probably better than the Air 2S. Now, I really do like that drone, but it's a little bit more contrasty. The colors are a little bit more saturated. The profile, it feels a little bit more flat and natural, so the files themselves feel a lot more flexible when it comes to grading them. Now, where I felt that you could really feel the difference with the larger sensor was in the dynamic range, particularly in its capacity to handle highlights. If you had a significant light source like the sun in the frame, the highlight roll-off was really, really nice, and I felt that about pretty much all of the colors. It's just a really nice color roll-off. and the image isn't over sharpened at all. So the actual video image that you get out of this is very, very, very good. Another thing that this has, like the Mavic 2 Pro, that the Air 2 doesn't have is the adjustable aperture. Now, it's particularly relevant when you're shooting video because it allows you to maintain a constant shutter speed even when the light's changing. So with an ND filter, you can get a shutter speed of something like 1/60 that's going to give you really nice, buttery, smooth footage. And when you're changing the drone around and the light's changing, you can maintain that by just adjusting the aperture. So you've always got that 1/60 and get that same quality in your footage. If you don't have adjustable aperture, then you have to play around more with NDs and vary NDs. Every time you take off and land, every time the light changes, you have to adjust the ND just a little bit just to maintain that same shutter speed. So overall then you can expect really excellent video quality from this sensor. And as I said, it is better than the Air 2S. It's slightly less punchy, it's slightly less sharpened, it's slightly less saturated. So I find that the color is more natural and you get a more flexible file for grading. But how important that is to you really depends. How much of that you're going to notice really depends on what you're doing with your footage and how important the fine details are. Now, the still images from the camera are also excellent, which you would expect from that larger Micro Four Thirds sensor. Now, it shoots in 4:3 ratio, which is a ratio that I happen to like. It's the same as a medium format camera. I don't really like the 3:2 ratio that you get in most modern cameras now. So I really do like the ratio of the photographs. The images are 20 megapixels, which is, I mean, it's okay. I wish that that DJI had increased the resolution a little bit. With 20 megapixels, you're getting 5,000 by 3,900, which is enough to print an image of about half a meter at native resolution, and it will look great. But it doesn't give you the capacity to make, if you want to crop into that, then you're going to start losing image data. So just something like 26 or 30 megapixels would be preferable, but still the image quality that you're getting from this is excellent. Now, it's possible that DJI stuck with the 20 megapixels to increase the camera's low light capabilities. I really don't know. But either way, the raw files out of this look excellent. They edit really well. They're great for web and they're great for prints. Now, despite the fact this is a relatively big and heavy drone compared to something like the Air 2S, it does feel super responsive and super nippy to fly. I've really felt comfortable flying it. I've flown it in quite a lot of windy conditions, and I've not really had any wind warnings yet or had any fear that it's not going to be able to handle the wind. And literally every bit of footage that I've got out of it has been really, really smooth, no matter what the wind's been doing. The drone's been able to hold its own in the wind and just deliver really smooth footage. And I just don't really have that feeling that the wind is going to be a problem, headwinds are going to be a problem pushing it back too far. Now, obviously, when you fly it, you have to take precautions. It is still a drone and wind is going to affect it. But I did feel that the wind is a lot less of an option than when I'm flying a smaller drone, something like the Mini 3 Pro or something like that. When we were in Greenland, we were filming and photographing icebergs, which were more than 2 kilometers away from where we were standing. So we had to fly 2 kilometers out over water just to get to the iceberg so we could photograph and film them. That's a little bit stressful. The drone's a long way away. 2 kilometers is quite a long way to fly. But the drone handled it really, really well. We were able to get there and back just using about 8% of the battery in about 3 minutes, which gives you plenty of time around the icebergs to fly and get footage and shoot photographs and things like that. And again, there were no worries about wind while we were out there. In terms of the noise, it's not a super quiet drone. It's not as quiet as something like the Air 2S, but it does feel relatively quiet. The noise isn't too bad. It's not a really high-pitched whining, and I did find it a little bit more pleasing than something like the Mavic 2 Pro. Now, the video transmission on this is 03 Plus, which has been around for quite a while now, and in my experience, it is just super, super stable. I've not had any issues at all with connectivity when I've been flying this drone. No dropouts, no scary moments. The only issue that we did have was on a particular evening when there were 7 of us with drones flying out to an iceberg, and there are about 3 other Mavic 3 drones there, and everyone was using a DJI drone, and we were flying about 2 kilometers away. So even though we were trying not to get our signals crossed, it's just inevitable that the drones were crossing over, and we were all getting repeated signals that there was remote interference. But the worst that did was just give us some stutter in the feedback, a little bit of hesitation, but the feed never dropped, not once. Now, when it comes to the tracking modes, as I said at the beginning of this video, as a landscape photographer, they're not something that I really use at all in the way that I use drones. I don't have drones following me or chasing after cars or things like that, or very rarely do I do that. What I do tend to use is the highlight feature to give me orbits as I pan around a particular feature in the landscape, or a car or a person standing on a rock or something like that. It's very intuitive and easy to access. You just draw a box on the screen. And again, in my experience, the software is very good at recognizing what it is that you want to lock onto and just staying locked on that as you orbit around it, whether that's a mountain or a person or a car or whatever. But beyond that, I really can't say what the tracking features are like, what it's like at following you through trees or anything like that. One thing that I did notice though, and this is the same on the previous Mavic 3 and the same on the Air 2S, is that you can't use active tracking modes when you're shooting in 5.1K. You have to go down to 4K to be able to access any of those features. Now, the drone has pretty much 360-degree obstacle avoidance with all of the sensors forward facing, upward facing, rearward facing, downward facing, and sideways facing. Now, I tend to do most of my flying in relatively wide open places, far away from people or obstacles or buildings and things like that. So obstacle avoidance isn't something that I use a huge amount of the time, but it is nice to have things like the sideways facing sensors, because it's not always easy to see what you're doing. And if you're doing panning shots or orbiting shots, you really can't see where you're going sideways. So it does give you that extra level of security. The Air 2S doesn't have sideways facing sensors, and I've crashed a couple of times, just crashed into the ground when I've been doing rotations around objects because of that lack of sensors. With this, you do get that warning and that extra level of security. They're not foolproof though. They don't react well to things like snow because they work on a contrast basis. So in environments where there's really, really low levels of contrast, so when everything is white, then it can fool the obstacle avoidance. And again, I've crashed, not this drone, I've never had any crashes with this yet, touch wood, but it is something to be aware of, that they're not completely foolproof. Now, the battery life is one of the big draws of this drone. DJI advertised it as having 46 minutes of flight time, which is a big jump, a 50% jump almost over the 31 minutes that you get on something like the Air 2S. Now, in reality, you're never going to get 46 minutes because you're going to be flying in wind and changing directions and things like that. What you're going to get is much closer to something like 36 or 37 minutes. But with a drone like the Air 2S, you're actually getting something like 23 or 24 minutes. So it is a big difference over that. And when you factor in the 3 batteries, if you've got 3 batteries, if you've got the Fly More kit, you're probably going to get about 40 minutes more flight time out of this with the 3 batteries than you would with the Air 2S. Now, that is assuming that you're flying the battery all the way down to 0, which of course nobody does. Usually you're going to be bringing the drone back home when the battery's on about 30%. So obviously that does reduce the actual practical flight time when you can be out taking photographs or filming. But the reality of it is that 70% that you're getting from this battery before you return home is giving you about 25 minutes of flight time, which is a lot more time to be filming and really, really good. The other thing that I find with this drone is that I get multiple flights out of one battery. It's really common with me to get the drone up in the air and fly for about 10 or 15 minutes and then land and still have about 50% of the battery left, but I'm not going to be taking off with 50% of the battery left, knowing that's only going to give me a few minutes in the air. I'm going to be putting in a new battery, so I would usually go home with 3 batteries that were still half full. With this drone, if you're flying it for like 10 or 15 minutes, when you land, you've still got something like 70% of the battery left. So I found that I was much more capable of getting multiple flights out of this, taking it off, doing some video, doing some photographs, landing, then driving somewhere else, and then taking off again using the same battery, and not having to be worried that I was getting right down to the bottom of the battery life. So in that respect, I find the batteries not only to have that longer life, but to be a lot more practical. I go home with less battery, with less flight time left over in the batteries with this drone than I did with the Air 2S. Overall then, this is an excellent drone. In terms of the image quality, like the Mavic 3, I think it's probably the best image quality for video and still that you can get on a consumer level drone at the moment. The features that it doesn't have from the Mavic 3 Cine, Things like the telephoto camera are things that I never really missed. There's not been a single time when I've been flying this when I thought I really wish I had a telephoto camera now. And likewise, things like the onboard storage or the capacity to record in ProRes. The ProRes is something that is really only useful if you're shooting really professional commercial level productions. For the vast majority of people, the D-log footage that you're going to get out of this drone is more than good enough for pretty much every kind of use. Certainly it's good enough for me. Now, in terms of all the other features, it really is an excellent drone. The battery life is fantastic, and the 360-degree sensors really do give you a sense of security. And these are things where it really does have a big edge over something like the Air 2S. It's really nice to fly. It handles very well in wind. The connection is really, really good. But whether this is a better choice than something like the Air 2S really depends on you, the uses that you have for it, and how demanding that you are in terms of getting the absolute very, very best out of image quality in terms of low light performance and dynamic range. It is a heavier drone, so it is a lot less convenient to carry if you're carrying lots of other camera gear and tripods like I am. But at the same time, it's really not that much heavier, and I've been using this along with a medium format system. So I do have a heavy backpack, and I've not really felt that this has limited me in any way or stopped me from doing anything that I want to do. So overall, it is an excellent drone, and for me feels probably like more of a natural upgrade from something like the Mavic 2 Pro than the Mavic 3 or Mavic 3 Cine did. Alright, I think that's it for this review. I hope it's covered everything. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been interesting. But if there's anything that I've missed, just drop me a comment down below and I will get back to you, or send me an email. And if you've enjoyed the video, if you've enjoyed the review, please remember to like or give me subscribe, because it really does help the channel. And if you enjoy my photography, if you enjoy the way that I shoot, I'd love to have you join me on a workshop. I'll be returning to Greenland. I'll be going back to Iceland and Norway, as well as trips to places like Madeira, to Patagonia, to Namibia. So if you're interested in joining me on a workshop, you can find full information on my website about all of the trips that I'll be doing next year and the year after. So if there's anything that you're interested in, just drop me a line there and let me know. And as ever, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Good luck with all your photography, and take care. See ya.